Alrighty, welcome back. So we've gone through the nuts and bolts, and now what I'd like to look at briefly is a thematic overview of this course. Frenemies, what is it really all about? I'm going to answer a series of questions. One of the things I disliked the most as a student was to come into a course and have a professor assume that everybody knew what the course was about. Now, this is particularly important for a class like this, which is an unusual course. It's not psychology, physics, chemistry, what have you. Okay, so I want you to know what I think this course is about and why I think it's important. So why and what are frenemies? And what I really want to understand here is, what are human relationships all about? And the reason I've chose frenemies is because the concept captures this both and situation with our world. Kant says that all human relationships and human psychology is a form of asocial sociality. So to be social is to be connected with others, to be in harmony with them. To be asocial is to want to be misanthropic, want to be separated from them and disconnected, or to be in conflict with other human beings. And what we see with all our relationships is that there's always a mixture of harmony and conflict. And so in a sense, we're all frenemies because we're all in this perpetual state of connecting over certain common things and being in conflict with one another over other things. And that connectedness could be the deep love of a family or a real, true friend, or it could just be a kind of acquaintanceship that one has at work or at school, or as a customer in a business or out on the street in New York. Conflict could range from anything extremely trivial to the kind of intense conflict that leads to people killing each other, for example, or truly hating each other, right? Friendship is a fundamental element of human nature and our psychology. If you want to understand why people have the relationships they have, you need to look at human psychology. And to say human psychology is really to say two interconnected things: human nature and human character. Human nature is that foundational thing that we all have in common across time and space, across race, across ethnicity, across gender or sex differences, and so on and so forth. We have much more in common as human beings than we have different. And most of the things that are different are really not so much in us, but in our circumstances. Right? So human nature, I use that expression, not in any original way, to capture all those fundamental characteristics of human beings that are common to all human beings 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 5 days ago, right? Here in the United States, in Europe, in Africa, in China, in India, what have you, right? What does human nature desire, right? We desire to be happy. And we realize immediately that friendship is essential to our happiness. It may be almost all of what matters in making us happy. We desire simply to be around others. We engage in common endeavors and enterprises with others, with partners, with parents, with brothers and sisters, with true friends, with husbands and wives, so on and so forth. So we need other people to help accomplish our goals, right? We also have them not as helpers alongside us or teammates or partners alongside us, but as an audience to our lives. The people we care about, one of the ways in which we actually care about them is we care about their opinion of us, right? We live in the age for 30 years now of self-esteem. We're all supposed to have magical self-esteem because we're a human being and we're ourselves. Well, that is baloney. That is BS. Our self-esteem comes from us viewing ourselves, or maybe we should say self-worth or self-value, or dignity, right? Or self-respect. This comes from us judging ourselves based on our own moral code. If we don't live up to our own moral code, we're not going to have a high opinion of ourselves. Likewise, we're not always the best judge of our own characters. And that's another reason why we need other people, strictly. We need other people to judge us. Yes, we live in a society where it's verboten to judge people. And in some ways it's inappropriate, in some ways it can be bigoted, and so on and so forth. But on a daily basis, we judge people constantly, especially if we're honest with ourselves, instead of being mired in the politically correct virtual reality fantasy that separates the pretend world of political correctness versus our real thoughts that every human being actually has. We constantly judge others, we constantly judge ourselves. But we don't care, and we shouldn't care about everybody's opinion. We should care about those opinions who we love, who we trust. And you might even think of the person that you really love, that you really respect, who's a true friend, is that person whose opinion you're going to take seriously, especially when they're critical of you, right? The best thing we could have for our own self-development as human beings and achieving our happiness is to have friends around us who are willing to tell us the truth. The truth. And the problem with political correctness is it is a lie. It is a fantasy, right? It is a make-believe that is used against people, or other people use it for virtue signaling, right? That is a fiction, because all of us know deep down inside that we judge, and the question is not whether we judge, it's how and why we judge. What are our criteria? Are our criteria wealth or race? Or is our criteria the content of one's character, as Martin Luther King said? Why do we have friends? Why do we have enemies? Why do we have people around us, family, so on and so forth? Because we're social and political animals. And to say we're social animals is to simply say we do not exist by ourselves. Voltaire. John Donne, the English poet, famously said, "No man is an island. No human being is an island. They don't exist unto themselves autonomously and completely independently of one another." And why is that? Starting with, we're not self-sufficient. We need other people. We're dependent on other people. And that need can be a challenge, but that need can also be very positive because we have basic necessities of life that we need, and we don't get by ourselves. If you think about what the economy is, it is a system of exchange of wealth and resources built on the common human needs that every human being has, that force us into exchange to get what we want from other people to satisfy our needs. And Aristotle is going to make a really keen observation in the Nicomachean Ethics that all friendship is a form of exchange. And the point is, once we've got some of these basic material well-being, the needs of mere existence taken care of, we have other higher psychological, emotional, and intellectual needs that we need to be satisfied with camaraderie, with comradeship, with other human beings, be they family members or true friends. Interesting, we can't be friends with everyone. What's the difference between being friends with everybody and being married to everybody? The whole concept of marriage, the whole concept of true friendship, is that it's not extended to everyone. You're judging other people. You're excluding other people. You're choosing not to love everyone. Well, of course you wouldn't do that. And there are all types of logistical reasons as to why not. But if you, quote, loved everyone, or were true friends with everybody, you'd be friends with nobody. It would be a meaningless idea. The idea of love and friendship connotes a special, you might say an honor or relationship conferred only on a select few. Conferred only on a select few. Sometimes family members and sometimes not, right? A great line, Edna Buchanan, she says, "Friends are the family you choose." And the problem with family is that you don't choose it, right? And you may well have been born into a family with many lovely people who you deeply love and choose to love them, not just you're forced together. The problem with family is you don't choose who your parents are. You don't choose who your brothers and sisters. You don't choose who your cousins are. Friends you can choose. And even with your own family, as you get older, obviously you develop tighter bonds with certain people and not others. And sometimes it's very conventional, like you have tight bonds with your parents and your brothers and sisters more than your cousins. But sometimes there's someone in your immediate family, which I'm familiar with, that you lack for various reasons. Those types of connections. We often talk about asocial behavior. That's people who want to be isolated, misanthropic. But conflictual behavior is just as much a part of human relationships as harmonious. So asocial behavior, in a sense, is social behavior, right? We all want to get along up to a point, but there's the famous line from Rodney King, if you remember who he is or have learned about him. He said, "Can't we all just get along? Black, white, police, civilian, rich, poor, you have it." And we always assume that and this is a kind of politically correct aspiration, because we're trying to be honest about what human beings are really like in this class. Why would we lie to ourselves about what human beings are like? Because let's face it, human beings are beautiful and amazing, but they also do awful things. And all we're doing is acknowledging both sides of the coin, right? Simple as that. Our premise very often in the kind of realm of political correctness is that our desire is always to be in harmony with other people. Well, we know that's not true. We, in a sense, need conflict. We need enemies. It's part of human psychology. It's part of the competition of life. Some people want more than others, and those people are willing to go out and get it. They're going to garner resources from other people in a zero-sum game that other people are not going to get. Right? That is a part of the base reality of animal existence. Right? Because we're living a distinctly human existence, but we are human animals, and you can never lose sight of that. The other thing is we all desire recognition, right? We want if we want to have a sense of self-respect and self-worth, that's wonderful, but one of the great sources that comes from is other people respecting us. And some people want to be recognized as equal, and some people want to be recognized as superior. So, in a democratic society founded on the principles that God or nature has made us and made us all equal, and that there's a fundamental equality, a moral equality of all human beings. Our natural inclination is we want to be recognized as equal. But if we look out at the society, the world of work and the world of adult life, we see constantly people striving to be recognized as unequal. Now, not in the context of law and the Constitution or politics, but in the context of work, in the context of love, in the context of play, what have you. All right, so if people want to be recognized as superior, that immediately implies conflict between us. Frenemies, because, in Book 8 of Aristotle's Ethics, which we're going to read later, he talks about complete friendship, which we might just call true, real friendship, rather than the appearance of friendship, which we're going to see in the money, right? And when you look at this image that he paints of true or complete friendship, you realize it's a beautiful picture that's almost an unattainable ideal, right? We can see it, we can conceive of it, we can aspire to it and shoot and aim for it, but it's hard to say that we've actually realized it or actualized it in our lives. So Aristotle is going to say anything less than a true friend is not really a friend at all. But what's the sad truth about the real world? And it's not you're not going to like crying, but it's one of those truths that one learns as an adult, that all relationships are imperfect, that all are some mixture of harmony and conflict, right? And the notion, for example, of true love, that two people being destined together, maybe two people were kind of destined to be with one another, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean they see eye to eye on everything, and those things they don't see eye to eye on, they're in conflict over. But that also, they have a special and strong enough relationship and knowledge of one another, it means they persist and persevere despite those conflicts, which says something, very remarkable about any friendship or relationship, that people would be willing to do that. Aristotle says, in his Ethics, which we're going to read, he says, without friends, no one would choose to live, even if he or she possessed all other goods, like all other stuff they might want, wants and desires, right? So no one would be happy. No one would even choose to live, even if they had all the riches in the world, all the whatever it is you can imagine, cars, money, security, whatever you imagine it is, real estate. It wouldn't mean anything to anybody if they didn't also have friends. You think about what friends do. You share with them. It doesn't mean you give freely for nothing necessarily. You share with them your experiences, the goods, the desires you have. They participate in your life in a variety of different ways. There's a famous scene in a famous movie called Citizen Kane about this media mogul, William Randolph Hearst, and he's named Citizen Kane in the film. Orson Welles, considered one of the greatest films ever made. And he becomes an obscenely rich man. He's older, and he's living in a house that he calls Xanadu, and it has everything. It has opulence, it has statues and art and gold and silver and what have you. And he lives there all alone, and there's this amazing scene of him walking down the hallway by his statues, by all his wealth, all the goods that he possesses, to use Aristotle's language. And guess what? He's all alone with his stuff. And when he's all alone with it, the stuff, it's very clear the way the scene is shot that all this stuff doesn't mean anything, because the one thing he needs as a human being he doesn't have. Right? Aristotle, in his simplicity, makes a brilliant remark. He says friendship is not just necessary, but also noble. What does he mean? Just take it in two parts. Friendship is necessary. We need other human beings to help us satisfy our desires, our needs, our dreams, and so on, and to participate in our lives as partners or audience or some mixture of both. We can't get by without them, right? No one would choose to live, right? Basic existence, to live. But we all know we do not want to just live, as Aristotle says, and I think we all understand. We want to live well. We want to be happy. We don't want to just survive. Like a slave survives. Shouldn't they be happy? No, of course not. Because there's all things that are restricted from them that prevent them from living a good life. But friendship is also noble. And this is a word, of course, we don't use in our English most of the time. But what he's saying here is friendship is not just a matter of necessity. It's part of the higher life of human existence that transcends mere survival, that deals with our emotions. Let's put it this way, deals with our hearts and our minds, and our aspirations that extend beyond mere existence. He says this is interesting. Friendship seems to hold cities together, and lawgivers, that's politicians or legislators, are more serious about it than about justice. When people are friends, they have no need of justice. Imagine if everybody were truly a friend. Here seems to be the implication. We'd have no need of government. We'd have no need of police. We'd have no need of laws. Of course, he acknowledges that's not the case. We do need it because not everybody's friends, right? And here, friendship is something clearly other than that intimate personal relationship, because he's talking about in the context of citizens. It holds citizens together because they have something serious in common. A community is a group of people who hold something serious in common, like the same gods or the same book of their religion, the same moral principles, the same outlook on life. It's not that they eat the same food or, they watch the same TV shows. It's not unimportant, but that's the silly lower level stuff. We're talking about the stuff that knits people together as citizens. So you can imagine that if we were all friends in a serious way, that when we did have problems, when we did have conflicts, we'd resolve them ourselves. The whole existence of government and the police force and laws is predicated on the notion that we need some external authority to regulate us in those moments when we can't regulate ourselves because we have conflicts with people, among other things, in which we're not sufficiently close with them to be able to resolve those problems ourselves. So let's step back for a moment and kind of recap. If you want to understand human relationships, you have to understand human nature. So a lot of this course we're going to touch on these kind of core dynamics of, you could say, human nature and the human condition that force us into certain types of relationships with other people by default that really we have no control over. All human beings are a mixture of nature and nurture, first and second nature. We have our common humanity, and we have those, or our genes, or those elements that shape us through environment. We have a human nature, but also a human character. A character is something incredibly important for this course, because all our friends are going to have a common character and a common moral code. And character is what's inscribed in you by your moral training, right? And normally when we think of character, we think of good character. Someone of sound moral principle who doesn't just demonstrate it through talk or reading books, but who's executed it in life. And you look at them and say, that was not an easy moral decision to make in terms of their action, but they did it. And they stuck with their principles in a circumstance in which someone else might easily have been willing to compromise their moral principles and lack good character, right? So character is literally the word for it, and the root is like a letter, right? Like letters are characters in an alphabet, right? So character, the Greek root of the word, and the English word character literally comes from that Greek root. It literally means to inscribe, or something inscribed, like the way letters are inscribed in you. But here we're talking about the way in which moral principles and codes of conduct are inscribed in you through years of habituation and training, starting with your parents, education, and those people around you whose opinions you trust. Our character is always developing, and we always have teachers. And those teachers, I'm not talking about professors, give me a break. Most professors don't know anything about these kind of things, except what they read in books, right? So I'm talking about people whose opinion you trust, who you allow them to judge you and your character. So that, why? So that, not so you can feel bad about yourself, so you can become a better person, better human being. The key theme that I raise in introducing the concept of human nature is that our relationships are a product of our nature. You cannot understand our relationships if you do not understand our nature. Or to put it in the language of today's speak, human identity. We talk about identity politics, right? And that the political outlook is based on a conception of identity, right? Today, in our moment, so much of human identity is defined by things that you have no control over. And you are judged based on things you have no control over, right? And very often in this course I do a little bit on identity politics, which I cut out for the summer, but I want to just mention this right now. Identity politics has to do with stereotyping and making judgments about a person's identity based on factors that they have no control over, or in some cases, no direct control. You are who you are based on your class. You are who you are based on your race. You are who you are based on your sex or gender. You are who you are based on your sexual orientation. You are who you are based on your political orientation. A lot of discussion and research has gone into seeing that a lot of people's political outlook is partially genetic, which is interesting, which is to say human nature. Even today, you are who you are based on whether you're a person who accepts the science or accepts everything the mainstream media says to you, versus those hooligans and deplorables who don't, who are skeptical of the things they see in the media. Today, there's even a division right now, those that you see fomented by corporations in the media, between those who are vaccinated and unvaccinated, as if there's a mortal conflict between these two groups. If you feel the need to get vaccinated, you go and get vaccinated, and the whole idea is then you're protected from people who are unvaccinated. So there's no necessary reason for there to be some kind of arch conflict. But see, I think the Yankees game, they were either we're not permitting they're not permitting people who are unvaccinated, or they're segregating them out. And our society has gone through a massive segregation process over the last few decades over identity politics. And of course, we all know prejudice is wrong. We all know stereotyping is wrong. We know segregation is wrong. But identity politics presents itself as the solution to the old bigotries of the past, the old racisms of the past, the old classisms of the past, and the old sexisms of the past. And what has it done? It has sought to reintroduce and reinscribe all those stereotypes about gender, about race, about class, about ethnicity, about sexual orientation, right? And one of the things I want to focus on in this class is that Martin Luther King had the solution. Martin Luther King was correct. He said it's not the race, color, or creed, or we could add sexual orientation, or class, or nation you come from. It's the content of your character. Now the real question is, why does he say that? What makes that statement? I'm going so far as this is not opinion. I think this is correct. Right? First of all the things, all the markers of identity we've just been talking about, you have no control over. If you're white, black, green, purple, yellow, fuchsia, rainbow color, you have no control over that. We can all sense how illogical, let alone unjust, but how illogical it would be to judge someone based on something they have no control over. So you can take this whole list. In many cases, virtually, no one has any control. You love a certain person in a certain way. You don't have control over it. That's not your say. For the most part, you were born that. Lady Gaga, you were born that way. But your character, by definition, is understood as that thing that makes you, that you actually have control over. Right? Character is the product of choice. I choose to do the right thing versus the wrong thing. I choose to do the noble thing over the ignoble thing. I choose to make myself a better person rather than languish, and so on and so forth. Those are choices. And those are the exact types of things morally that are appropriate to judge people on, not things that they have no control over, right? Let alone the fundamental problem of identity politics being that it reinscribes a type of stereotyping that we all know is wrong. Critical race theory sees our society as fundamentally racist, and that white people are a certain way and black people are a certain way. Because, well, it mostly focuses on white and black, but it's not exclusive to that. Now think about that. In what way, first of all, what does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be black? And in what way are you or anybody else who happens to be described in those categories that you may not adhere to yourself, in what way are you a member of that group? Right? Are you a human being first? Are you a nurse, a doctor, a student first before you are the color of your skin? Never mind that the very concept of race is a fundamentally ambiguous category. I mean, honestly, for the most part, it's the color of someone's skin. The most superficial and the most meaningless aspect of themselves. The question is, what is inside the book? Because the cover is a cover is a cover. What is the content of their character? Right? And we all have a natural affinity for people who are decent, rather than those who are not. And there are many levels of decency and not decency, right? From people who are, unusual, like Socrates or Jesus or Buddha, or Gandhi, right? To people who are just generally decent, and then you've got people who are kind of not so great, and then you've got people who are do horrifically awful things. And most of us, where are we? We're all somewhere in the middle. A little bit of this and a little bit of that, right? So, on that note, I want to play, dealing with a couple contemporary things, I want to play a video of what I think video I think captures what's really going on in our society today. Because I continue to talk to students about the conflicts presented in the media between races, genders, ethnicities, classes, sexual orientations. We have a media image of our society that everyone is at each other's throats, ready to do each other off. And what I think they're really doing is fomenting conflicts. That when I actually see ordinary people of all stripes, I mean, for goodness sake, we're in New York City. I mean, if you don't like a certain type of people, you can't function here. Like, you've got to be open, you've got to be tolerant, you've got to be accepting of diversity. Because you realize what it's not about, that all those kaleidoscopic images of people, that's just the surface. The question is, what kind of person are you? And that has no direct or necessary connection with these rubrics of identity that have come out of identity politics. So let me play a video that I think kind of sums up the reality going on behind the scenes of this media image that's presented to us. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, here we go.
This will get you thinking. David Attenborough posted it on Twitter. If you collect 100 black ants...
This will get you thinking. David Attenborough posted it on Twitter. If you collect 100 black ants and 100 fire ants and put them in a glass jar, nothing will happen. But if you take the jar, shake it violently and leave it on the table, the ants will start killing themselves. Red believes that black is the enemy, while black believes that red is the enemy, when the real enemy is the person who shook the jar. The same is true in society. Men versus women, black versus white, faith versus science, young versus old, and so it goes on. Before we fight each other, we must ask ourselves, who shook the jar?
I can't tell you how prescient that is. And the fundamental question he asks, who shook the jar? We see these two people, or two groups, in conflict with one another in the media. And the question is, who is above, who is helping and encouraging to foment this conflict? We think that the person we're really in conflict is over here. But in fact, the group, whoever it is that we're really in conflict with, is up above us, superior to us, not the person next to us, of different orientation, of different skin color, and etc., etc., etc. Right? Anybody who would foment such a conflict knowingly would lack good character, to say the least, number one. Number two, this is a classic strategy to control people. Let me repeat. This is a classic strategy to control people that has been used throughout history, and we will find examples of in some of our readings. It's called divide and conquer. When you divide people, let's put it this way, when you divide the people, as in we the people of the American Constitution, when you divide them, they are weak. When they are united, they are strong. When they are divided, they are weak against that person above us who's helping to foment this conflict, in part through the media and politics. And on the other hand, when we're united, we're strong to fight whoever this group is that's trying to foment this conflict between us as human beings. So I want to conclude this discussion of these forces dividing our society with a couple videos and then just a little flip back to an overview of the course. But one of the central things that has come before our society in just the last few years, 5, 10 years, maybe even closer to 5, is this concept of critical race theory. So the first thing you should understand is that the origins of critical race theory start in something called critical theory, which is really Marxism that came out of the Frankfurt School of Germany. And the Frankfurt School of Germany promoted Marxism and communism. Many of these intellectuals during the 1930s came to the United States and peopled universities. They were professors and started teaching throughout the country and promoting critical theory of Marx, which I'll explain in a second, the most famous being Herbert Marcuse. But the big thing these people despised, first of all, they embraced communism, which means they hated the principles of this country of liberty, political, civic, economic liberty, property rights. Communism, the government is in control, and whatever rights you may or may not have don't come from nature or from God, your human nature, they come from the state, and therefore they can be taken away by the state. So critical race theory is adding this layer of race on top of what is essentially Marxist theory, and many people don't know that, and they don't realize what's really going on here. But the basic theory of critical theory was that capitalism was the oppressor, and communism was the solution. Communism was going to liberate everyone from the shackles of the middle class and from the system of capitalism. And the first problem with that is capitalism, whatever its imperfections today, and we could have a lifetime discussion about its imperfections. The system of capitalism, which is really underrooted by a political system that guarantees rights and liberties, equal rights and liberties to citizens, this has produced more wealth and more opulence around the world than any other political and economic system, hands down, right? The moment that you remove capitalism is that you remove not just wealth from the wealthy, but you remove wealth from the middle class and even the lower classes, right? The very existence of a middle class is something that historically was almost non-existent. You either had the very rich who inherited the wealth, and you had the poor, the peasants, the serfs, the slaves. There was no in-between. Capitalism gave birth to a middle class of people who could make their money on their own and sustain themselves on their own, right? So the whole logic of this oppressor and oppressed classes, or victim classes, between the capitalists and the workers. And the problem with Marxism is that the workers always made enough money to get what they need, and there never was a communist revolution based on workers. It was based on intellectual elites, ideologues, and people with lots of education who are upper middle class people. If you look at the Russian Revolution, it was not done by workers or peasants or serfs or farmers. It was done by an intellectual elite that was well off and very well funded. Sorry, it was not what Marx described. Then the next thing is communism has been the great oppressor around the world, whether you look at the Soviet Union, whether you look at Venezuela, whether you look at China, right? In China, Joe Biden described it as a cultural difference that the Chinese oppress a Muslim group called the Uyghurs. And they have made them into political prisoners, and they have put them in concentration camps. The Muslim Uyghurs of China is a very tragic and disgusting story, and China is one of the arch communist countries today. So communism has never been what Marx said it would be. It's just either he was living in fantasy land, or he was being disingenuous with his followers. Add to that race. Critical race theory says there's an oppressor class and an oppressed class. If you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're black, you're oppressed. That is the logic of everything. And this logic is entering in our school systems, and it could be taught to your kids if it hasn't been taught to you. And one of the primary things that it does is it's determined to compel people to see every issue through the lens of race as being the only lens that's available. Now, if you disagree with critical race theory, it doesn't mean you think American history was perfect or that we don't still have things to work on. What you disagree on is the solution to the problem. Right? The solution to the problem is merit. The solution to the problem is the rule of law, where the laws are the same and apply equally to everyone, and that they have opportunities, right, to either make the most of themselves or to not make the most of themselves, right? So I want you to watch a couple videos to get a sense of what's really going on here, and what, it's very rare that I come out and say that I think something's not right. But this is an instance, because I have a child in school, and I had a child who was starting to be taught about this stuff. And contrary to what you're going to see in the second video, little children do not see race. They do not pay attention to race. They pay attention, they do just what Martin Luther King said. They pay attention to how people treat them. And when people treat them decently, they like them. And when they don't feel comfortable with someone and they're not treated decently, the child does not like them. It's really simple, right? I'll leave it at that.
My name's Ian Rice. I've got two children here in the California School District. It's very apparent here by all of the parents that have spoken that this board and the school district is failing. More importantly, I came here to talk about critical race theory. This theory was never meant to be brought into grade schools, high schools, at all. It's actually taught in collegiate atmosphere. More importantly, the legal portion of the collegiate atmosphere, to see different laws through the lens of race, from an ethics and ethical standpoint, right? Not for grade schools and high schools. The problem bringing it to high school and grade school level is that we don't have the educators to properly teach these kids. Instead, they're using it as their own agenda to indoctrinate the kids to hate each other. And whether you believe that to be true or not, the reality is that's what's happening. Critical race theory is teaching that white people are bad. That's not true. That would teach my daughter, not her mother either. You already have an educator within your staff that has pulled my daughter aside and said, well, you're a minority, so you know better than to engage in certain things. When I was brought to the school's attention, nothing happened to the educator. Instead, my daughter was brought in, and she was ridiculed. So my question is now, with critical race theory being brought in, what is your criteria to educate the educators? And who are you to educate my children, or any of our children, in life issues? That's our job. Your job is to teach them math and science. Our job is to teach them about life. I believe racial issues and tensions across the U.S. are nowhere near what they used to be decades ago. Do we have a long way to go? Sure. Do we still have individuals out there to be taught? Absolutely. But I believe the people here don't look at me as a black, they look at me as a man standing in front of you, addressing the issue that we all are very passionate about.
Many of you might be saying, Professor, why are you talking about this esoteric thing, critical race theory? What's it got to do with me? I barely know anything about it. If you've been following the media, you've probably heard something about it, or you may even heard something about it from your fellow professors. But if you're not aware of it, you must be, because it is becoming more pervasive than you might realize. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video by a whistleblower at a company. What is the company? Hasbro. What is Hasbro? It's a child's toy company that makes all kinds of toys that you probably had Hasbro toys as a kid. And if and when you have kids, if you don't already have them, you probably have Hasbro toys. Now, this is what he has to say about what's going on in a child's toy company.
Is David Johnson. I'm a packaging engineer for Hasbro. They are attempting to covertly push CRT, critical race theory, through branding and messaging through their products. I decided to become Project Veritas because I oppose the indoctrination of children that they wanted to push.
Explain what we're looking at here.
This is the program developed by the Conscious Kid, which is working with Hasbro to teach children about racial bias at an early age.
Is this a mandatory all hands training?
Yes, it was mandatory for me.
Children as young as 2 are already raised to reason about people's behavior.
2-year-old racist is just an absurd concept.
By 3 to 6 months, babies are beginning to notice and already express preference by race. By age 3, children are already starting to apply stereotypes. They also may use racist language intentionally at this age.
I think this is where the mask levels flip a little bit.
This is what people are talking about regarding critical race theory.
This is critical race theory in practice. They explain that the white children in particular have the particular bias against black people. It's a mainstream ideology now, and it's in a lot of our institutions. People that I've spoken.
So the point of that video is to help illustrate the way in which this conception of human relationships is so pervasive right now in our society, even if you've never heard of this expression, and that it's now being introduced into child's toys, and that instead of trying to destroy and undermine all those stereotypes of race that we all know and understand as bad and nefarious, they're trying to leverage stereotypes of identity to pit people against themselves. Now you notice there's two separate discussions here. There's the problem and there's the solution. I think everyone in the United States is familiar, well, maybe we should be more familiar with the specifics of the failures of our nation in terms of justice and injustice. The question is, what is the solution? What is the solution? Obviously, it starts with an honest discussion about our history and an honest discussion about our relationships. But what I would argue is the solution is not to reinscribe stereotypes and to treat people as if they were nothing more than the color of their skin. This was, in one day not that long ago, was the very problem we were trying to liberate ourselves from. Okay. Do you want your children to be taught that they are racists or that they are victims of racism? You get one or the other choice, one lollipop or the other. Is there not another solution? So this course will focus on, we've just seen a little bit of the political, different facets or categories of understanding that frame our understanding of friendship. Starting with the political, right? We think of friendship primarily as a private matter, but we realize that citizens coming together in common cause for their nation or for their community means that there is friendship beyond our own homes or apartments. There's friendships out in the public sphere, in the public square. The social level. The social level is a level of interactions out in society that don't involve politics, right? So interactions based on our needs and intimate friendships and so on and so forth. The moral, right? One of the defining features that makes friendship what it is something that brings us together in common. And our moral principles and what we believe is right and wrong is essential to who makes our friends and not our friends. We are not going to be good friends with people who have fundamentally different moral codes of conduct than we do. Just not going to happen. Psychological, right? And this is maybe the one we typically think about when we think about friendships, is the emotional intimacy and what's really going on. And friendship is not just necessary but noble. There's something about a psychological or spiritual connection of heart and mind with other people that makes life worth living. And there's one more that should be on here, pardon me. It is the biological. The readings we're going to have for the following week, week number 2, center around the biological or evolutionary or genetic origins of human relationships in their broadest way. So you notice that we move from things that are very specific and narrow to things that are broad. So next week, when we start our main readings, we're going to start with this broad look at human relations as it is generated out of our biology. And one of the primary things our biology does that is distinct from other animals is that we speak and reason. What Aristotle and the Greeks called logos, speech and reason together. And that's where we get our word logic and the suffix for biology and sociology and so on and so forth, right? So speech sits at the center of our relationships in two ways. one as the mode of communication, and one speech as the realm of thinking consciously and the way that influences our relationships with others, and then the things that language is able to do that no other animal has, that helps us to form special relationships that no other animal is able to form simply because of their biology. Okay, great. Thank you very much.